Welcome to Forum 360 with its global outlook and local view. I'm Ardith Keck. In the words of my guest, domestic violence is an epidemic. My guest, Adrienne Rouan, is a victim of domestic violence who is recovering from it or has recovered. She is creating a nonprofit to help others recover. And she's working for Somatic Experiencing. That is the name that Adrienne will have to explain to us. She has also created a film, Scars Unseen is the title, which is being shown in a Hollywood theater. Adrienne, please tell us the significance of somatic experiencing.
Hi, Ardith. Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I would love to. And somatic experiencing is a science-based healing modality. And it's a very unique modality that is gaining more popularity. It's been around for a few decades now. And also, as the world has technologically advanced, we're now able to show in the technological field how somatic experiencing is healing us from the inside out. So those scars unseen, the name of our film, right, is it's literal and it's figurative because others cannot see it, and there actually are scars inside of us after we've been through abuse. So somatic experiencing helps us to heal those unseen wounds.
Okay. And why do you say domestic violence is an epidemic?
Well, it certainly felt like it was all encompassing in my world. I grew up in a home where it was happening, and then I ended up in a marriage where it was happening, and it was all around. And it's now the statistics are bearing out. At first, it was 1 in 4 women, and now through the pandemic, and the new statistics have shown that it's about 1 in 3 women who are in domestic violence situations.
That is scary.
Yes, I would call that maybe even a pandemic because it's about a third of women on the planet.
Right. Would you tell us about the film?
Certainly, yes. The film, I am a person in the film. My creation portion, my donation to the creation was my story, and my daughter as well was in the film, Victoria. The film was created and directed by Meredith Yinger and co-created by Natalie Perez, and their vision was they're 2 Los Angeles and they're based here, and their hope was to start changing the narrative around both women in film and also domestic violence. So instead of feeding into this world where we sensationalize the bad, the ugly, the difficult to discuss, they wanted to change the narrative and shed light on what it actually looks like to have had it happen to you, and then to transform it. So we wanted to really lean into what happens after, and how can you turn something that you couldn't have helped, that you did not ask for, how can you turn that into something beautiful one day?
All right. Can you tell us, are you able to tell us about your experience with domestic violence?
Yes, certainly. I'm happy to share. I think it's important that we share. And, I grew up in a home. I like to say, my parents were certainly loving parents. They love us and they loved us and they truly did their best. And also generational cycle breaking is very difficult, and especially in times when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't a lot of education about this. It happened to many of us, and we didn't know. It's been done this way for generations upon generations in many, many homes in our world. We didn't understand what was happening. And so once I turned 18 and I found this man who was supposed to be Mr. Wonderful, of course, and ran off and married him and ended up in the same situation because we can't follow a map that we don't have. So I followed the same map that I had been given inadvertently by my parents, and it was pretty horrific. You know, I've been through everything from emotional, mental, spiritual to physical and sexual abuse, and both growing up and then in my home, and a variety of them between the two. So the other part that I think is really difficult is that when you try to tell your story, sometimes you feel shameful or like you're making people in a bad light. So I shouldn't share about this because it's not mine to share. And I think for me, it's important to let people know that I then became very abusive to my daughter as well, extremely verbally abusive, extremely emotionally abusive to her. And I always felt like I was watching myself. Like, why am I doing this? How could I put upon her things that had been done to me that hurt so much? And this is the cycle. So I went through that cycle on all fronts. And at one point decided I have to find a way. This isn't possible. It's not sane. It's not a sane way to continue. And I didn't think I could continue or that I would continue in that way. So I made a choice and had a complete and utter mental, physical, spiritual breakdown. And out of that, then that was when the modalities of somatic experiencing and a few other body modalities, tri-method yoga, came into my world, and I started practicing because therapy helped, but it didn't fix it. I didn't know how. So my experience has been very long, very extensive. I'm going into my fourth decade soon, and it's a lifelong experience. And I don't think that separating ourselves from it is the answer.
So you actually caused your awakening just because you were questioning it? Or was there
I,
something else that influenced you to wake up?
it was questioning. I certainly was seeking help. And I would say the second part of that was that people didn't seem to know how to help. So it's one situation when you maybe have a well-resourced home and someone has a terrible situation happen and the family goes through a period of deep transition and there's feelings and emotions and anger and maybe a situation that occurs for a period of months to a year, and you have the resourcing and the family support and the community support to move through it and the professional support. For many folks, that's not the story, and that was in my home because first you don't talk about it, and then the medical professionals that I ended up seeking support from often were extremely dismissive. It was an uncomfortable topic to discuss, and they don't know what to do. They don't have, here's a pamphlet, and then depending on where you're from, I come from a family with a um, diverse socioeconomic background. So on one side of my family, um, we were learning to golf and taking lovely dinner trips and experiencing that side of life. And then on the other side, we're experiencing very blue collar existence, and especially in my home, even poverty. I was born and raised in a trailer park, so it was very interesting to see, and I think that was why I questioned. And then when I would go for help, depending on how someone knew me from which side of that family or whatnot, it was a very different experience. And that was something that made me angry at some point. Like, this is so odd. And why don't people know how to support someone who's broken and hurting and in need? How come everyone doesn't just know how to support, especially medical professionals and the therapy world?
Did you have bruises?
I did not as an adult. That was more when we were growing up, but we were homeschooled, so they weren't really ever seen. As an adult, he never left bruises, so I did not.
Hmm. Okay, what about your daughter? Is she now
Victoria,
free? Is she now
Victoria's.
free of?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
She's now free from abuse?
So we are in a very, very peaceful home, and if there are things that we're still working out, which we are, like all humans, um, we have the tools. We have the ability, the regulated nervous system to for me, for example, if I'm having an emotionally difficult day, to pause and realize, I'm not emotionally available to you right now. So I need some space, or maybe you need some space. So there's a lot more ability to stay in what we would call the regulated nervous system, going back to the somatic experiencing. And if I do have a day where I'm shouting or raising my voice or being unkind, thankfully it's quite rare nowadays. You can heal, you can shift, you can transition. Um, it's the ability to make a repair, right? To go back to someone whom you've harmed or said something unkind to, and apologize in a meaningful way, and then take action, consistent daily action, to shift how you're showing up and how you're feeling. So yes, I would say we are free in that it's not a perfect existence. I don't think that's possible on Earth. However, it is an existence filled with the knowledge and the trust that we can each move through whatever's coming up in life.
How old is she?
She's 17.
17.
Yes.
Well, it appears that you are recovering very well. Congratulations. That took a lot of work, I'm sure. How long has that taken you?
I believe it'll be lifelong. I still have the symptoms of PTSD that do pop into my life here and there. And I wouldn't even be living this life if it hadn't happened. The deep work, the work of, oh my goodness, sorry about that. The deep work of, bear with me 1 minute here.
I can hear you.
Can you hear the phone ringing? I'm so sorry. I didn't realize there was a phone plugged in. Okay, well, these are the things that happen sometimes. So pardon that. And the deep work of healing for me took about, I'd say, 1 year when I started the bodywork modality, to where I was able to actually start feeling like I was not stuck inside of my head and inside of my own body experience, to where I could communicate with the world. I would say it took about another 2 years for the emotional flashbacks to start easing up enough that I could think ahead of time, that I could plan ahead, that I could inform people in a way that wasn't scary to them of what was happening to me, or communicate professionally in my employment world. So it takes time. It's not an easy fix. And I think that's part of why the struggle is so big in our world, because we want it to be an easy fix. We'll just go get help and you'll be fine.
Did you ever have to call the police?
I did. I
And
did have the police
were they
involved.
helpful?
So I, I say I say no, because police are not trained, and I actually had the experience of wanting to be a detective, and I actually went through the training in the state of Ohio, and I graduated from a police academy, and they're not trained to be an emotional support person. They're not trained to come fix your problem. They're trained to stop the issue from interfering in the world, and to stop bodily harm from continuing upon a person, right, or harassment. But that doesn't really fix any. There's also a distancing that you're taught, because you really have to be distanced in order to keep your own sanity. So it's a very clinical experience, I would say, for most of the time, unless you're working with a trauma-informed police force.
And you were hospitalized at some point?
I was, and it was more for the eventual long-term effects of the post-traumatic stress than it was for an imminent situation. Although I was hospitalized, my ex put me into early labor when I was 28 weeks, and I was hospitalized for that. Thankfully, I was able to make it full time with her, but that was probably the most terrifying of all the things. And that was the other part, is I didn't get physically beat up, but emotional harm and emotional and mental harm can actually be more stressful upon a physical body at times, especially over a long time, even than physical, which is sometimes hard to hear. But I've had so many survivors agree with me on that. I mean, there were days where I would wish he would. It was insanity, right? You're living in insanity, chaos. I wish he would hit me so I could leave, because I was raised that you don't leave unless it's really bad. So yeah, I was hospitalized for, I think I was in the hospital for almost a week.
But they were not very helpful.
So again, it's almost like an ask don't tell situation, and keep in mind this was 17 years ago, so I know it's improving, but it was, are you being abused? And if you ask someone that and they're in the midst of it, 9 times out of 10, if they're depending on that person for home, for money, for existence, we're not going to tell you yes. Or maybe we don't even know that it's technically considered abuse. When I went through the police academy was when I learned that he was breaking all kinds of laws by treating me the way he was. I didn't know there was a law.
And now you're attempting to help others. Um, that is admirable. Please tell us about that road. What's it like?
Well, it's the deepest, most fulfilling work I've ever done in my life. Other than the day my daughter was born, it's there's something about showing up for others who have been where you or who are where you've been. Um, it gives such a deep sensation of joy, of hope for our world, of hope for humans, learning to love one another and be kind to one another again. And um, I say it in the documentary and even in the trailer, if I could just help one person was how I felt on the when I was starting to heal. I thought if I could help one person, then it will have made the journey mean something more than what the horrors were that happened.
I got so involved that we're more than halfway, but this is Ardith Keck, your host, and I'm introducing our guest, who is Adrienne Rouan, and she is a victim of domestic violence a number of years ago, who has recovered pretty well. And she's talking about domestic violence and all of that aspect and the abuse. I imagine it's easier to help others since you know what it is like when you're talking to someone who needs help.
I would say it makes a very big difference. And I know that some of my struggles in finding support was that I was seeking support from maybe others who perhaps even had been trained in how to help someone, but hadn't lived it themselves. And also, occasionally, especially in a non therapy setting, you're working with people who know about it, but maybe are even going through it. This happens to humans, and especially women, from every single background you can imagine, every single socioeconomic status. It is a human condition. It is a human situation. It doesn't discriminate against anything. So being able to meet someone with a knowing inside of me, knowing the things that people sometimes said that were well-meaning but just didn't do anything, right? Everything will always work out is was one of the worst. I used to hear that pretty frequently, and it was one of the most to me hurtful and annoying things someone could say because, well, they're just hoping. Well, what are you doing? Like I don't know what to do. I'm over here attempting to survive, and I don't. It felt very trite. So working with someone and knowing that I'm never going to say that ever to anyone I even meet, right? And so that helps a lot to know those things that people who haven't been through it, maybe again, well-meaning and well-intentioned, but I can certainly avoid saying those types of things or behaving or doing things like that.
And have you found a number of people with the same kind of experience that you had?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Does social media make a difference?
I would say yes. For me too. It's even meeting other providers who have now learned and taken their own stories and turned it into more of a purpose-driven experience because what we don't want to do is perpetuate victimhood. Social media has in the past done that extensively, and there is a point when we're a victim, but I think social media is now and our culture in general is starting to shift into that more resilience piece. Like what is out there, what hope is out there, what joy is out there after this, and is it possible to achieve it? And now how do I find a helper who will be capable of sitting with me in my pain and in the experience of grief, the experience of rage, because a lot of times people don't realize that anger is a big piece of healing. And social media is allowing us to realize that, oh, you can have these feelings, they're going to happen. And also now there are folks out here who've been through it who are also helping us to change that narrative again, because many times, especially women who've been hurt, we then either perpetuate it upon our children or upon society or upon men, and it's such a vicious cycle. And we are really, really looking to shift on social media the way that that's spoken about.
I imagine shifting the narrative of abuse and victimhood to a powerful place of resilience and strength is what you try to achieve during that time.
Yes, very much. It's a multifaceted approach when you're working from that trauma-informed perspective, which is really the term that I would use for what we're doing with shifting that narrative. It's not dismissing the pain. It's not dismissing that you were traumatized or abused. We acknowledge it. We hold space with it. We exist as a human with you in that regard. And then also, what do you need? What are you missing? What puzzle pieces are you missing that we could maybe plug you into? Action and change over hoping and wishing.
Is alcohol in part to blame for the abuse? Often.
It's alcohol is such an insidious substance because it's legal and honestly similar to cannabis nowadays. And I've worked 3 years in treatment centers as well. So as a therapist, so it's an insidious thing because many people really love that it's such a it's legal, it's available, it's fun, and really if you sink into the science behind how your nervous system and your ability to connect to another human works, um, it's not helpful, really. I strongly encourage people to reconsider and maybe explore what it is that alcohol does to us, and it, especially for someone who's survived the cycle of abuse and has not recovered or done their work, it can be some of the worst experiences that come out of that because you're not in your right frame of mind. You're not in your space of awareness. It diminishes it even more. So if someone struggles with anger or has been abused, certainly when a substance of any kind has taken away your ability to be present, then you're going to be more likely to abuse or to make choices to be around others who might abuse you.
And when you're in that state, does one blame themselves for the abuse?
I certainly did for a very long time. And in a space, I think it comes back to that self-awareness, right? Intending to raise my daughter in the first, 8 or 9 years to be, the way I was raised, it's watch, don't do what I do, but do what I say, behave a certain way, act in certain ways, to gain my approval, be a good little girl or a good little boy. And so much of that is we don't mean it to, but it really prepares us to then receive whatever's given to us. Because I want to be a good person. I want to be a good wife. I want to be a good, person in my community. And so I'm going to follow these rules without questioning. I'm going to believe the best of everyone, but without boundaries and self-awareness, it's so easy to fall into cycles that, again, if you were given that map as a child in any way, shape, or form, even nowadays with video games with our young people, incredibly violent video games that they're playing, right? They're getting a map ingrained, wired into their body, into their nervous system to follow. So if we're not teaching folks to also have boundaries, to question, to be present, then sure, we're going to blame ourselves because, oh, well, I was bad. I didn't know. I didn't have dinner ready on time. I didn't anticipate this this meeting, I didn't, it goes on and on and on, and it can be anywhere from a very light blaming, I need to do more, I need to get up earlier, all the way to, well, I didn't fix that person, I didn't give them what they needed, so I deserve what I just received.
Adrienne, you are a marvel, and I thank you for talking with us today. Difficult as it may have been, we are grateful for the conversation. Perhaps you have helped someone out there to see the light. We've learned a lot. This is Ardith Keck for Forum 360 with its global outlook and local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.